You are 11 years old and you are watching the Prime Minister on television, and something happens in you that you don't have language for yet. It isn't admiration exactly, though there is admiration in it. It's recognition. The way the person on screen commands a room, commands a nation, commands the attention of every camera and journalist and foreign leader in the frame. You look at that and something in you says yes, not as ambition exactly, but as identification, as if you are watching someone do the thing you were built to do and simply haven't started yet. Your parents notice that you watch the news the way other children watch cartoons. Your teachers notice that you argue positions with a precision that makes them slightly uncomfortable. You don't know yet what any of this costs. You just know that the person on the screen has power that matters, and that mattering is the thing you want most, and that wanting it this clearly, this early, is either your greatest asset or the first compromise you'll never be able to trace back to a single moment. If you want to follow this arc all the way to the end, Johan Andi is where it goes without the version they put in the biography. The path to Prime Minister is not a straight line, and it is not a meritocracy. And understanding those two things early is the difference between people who get there and people who deserve to. In the Westminster system, Britain, Canada, Australia, India, and the 40-some other countries that inherited or adapted this model, the Prime Minister is not directly elected to the position. You become Prime Minister by leading a political party, and you lead a political party by surviving the party. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this story. The electorate can remove you, but the party can remove you first, and faster, and without needing a reason that the public would recognize as legitimate. The party is the institution you actually serve, and the party's interests and the public's interests are related but not identical, and navigating the gap between them is the central skill of the entire career. You study politics at university, Oxford or Cambridge if this is Britain, a Russell Group school at minimum, because the informal credentialing of British political life is real and operates below the surface of every room you'll need to enter. In other Westminster systems, the specific institution matters less, but the educational pedigree still functions as a social sorting mechanism. You read PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics, and you are good at it. Genuinely good. Not just performing competence, but actually understanding how power structures work, how economic incentives shape policy outcomes, how philosophical frameworks get weaponized into political rhetoric. You join the student union. You run for positions you don't particularly need so that you can learn to run. Losing an election for student union treasurer at 20 is the cheapest education in electoral politics you will ever receive. You graduate and you go into one of the pipelines: think tank, political journalism, a position as a researcher or advisor to a sitting MP. These are the roots. They look different from the outside. From the inside, they're the same thing. Proximity to power as a credential for more proximity to power. You choose the advisor route because it puts you inside an actual constituency operation, inside the mechanics of how a political career is built and maintained at the ground level. You are paid £28,000 a year and you work 70 hours a week, and you learn more about how politics actually functions in 18 months than you learned in 3 years of university, because the theory of power and the practice of power are related the way maps are related to terrain. You run for parliament at 28, the selection process for a safe seat. A constituency your party holds comfortably and will continue to hold is its own political campaign, conducted entirely within the party, judged by local party members who have their own histories and preferences and grudges, and who will be evaluating you not just on your policies but on whether you look like the right kind of person for this constituency, which is a phrase that means many things, and most of them unspoken. You are the right kind of person. You win the selection. You win the general election with 58% of the vote, in a seat your party has held for 22 years. You are a member of parliament. Westminster is not what you expected. Not because it's worse, because it's more specifically human than the institution you imagined. The corridors of the Palace of Westminster smell like old carpet and catering. The debates in the chamber, which look on television like focused clashes of principle, are mostly attended by a handful of MPs and conducted according to procedural rules so arcane that the new members spend 6 months just learning which direction to face when. The real work happens in committee rooms, in the lobbies, in the tea rooms where the seating arrangement by party is informal but observed, in the WhatsApp groups where the actual discussion of policy and positioning happens before anything reaches the floor. You are a backbencher for 3 years. This is the period that destroys most careers, and most people don't understand why, because from the outside it looks like a waiting room. From the inside, it's a continuous low-grade test of whether you can be useful without being used, visible without being threatening, ambitious without advertising it. You vote with the party on almost everything, not because you agree with everything, but because a backbencher who votes against the whip is a backbencher who does not get called in the right rooms, and not getting called in the right rooms is how careers end before they begin. There is a 3-line whip on a piece of legislation that you have genuine concerns about. A welfare reform bill with provisions that you believe will cause measurable harm to a specific category of vulnerable constituent. You raise your concerns in the party meeting before the vote. You are listened to politely. The concerns are noted. The bill comes to the floor unchanged. You vote for it. You tell yourself that influence requires access and access requires loyalty, and this is a long game and one vote doesn't define a career. All of that is true, and you voted for something you thought would harm people. Both of those things are true at the same time, and you file the second one in a place you'll check less and less frequently as the years go on. You get your first ministerial appointment at 34. Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Secretary of State for Business, which means you attend meetings, carry messages, manage the minister's relationship with the backbenches, and learn the interior of a government department from the position of someone who can observe everything and decide nothing. You are a very good PPS. You are precise, discreet, and able to read a room's temperature in the first 90 seconds, which turns out to be one of the most valuable skills in government. The Secretary of State notices. He tells the Chief Whip, "You're ready for more." The Chief Whip makes a note. Junior Minister at 37. Minister of State for Housing at 40. By now you have a public profile that goes beyond your constituency. You appear on Sunday morning political programs where you defend government policy with a fluency and apparent conviction that impresses both the interviewers and the party machine. The apparent conviction is real about some of it. The housing brief genuinely interests you. You push through planning reforms that will produce an estimated 40,000 additional homes over a decade, which is real and consequential and yours. You also defend, on those same Sunday morning programs, a social care funding decision that you privately think is inadequate and that your department's own modeling suggests will create a gap of approximately £4 billion by 2028. You defend it because the alternative is resignation, and resignation over one policy dispute is how you exit the stage at the precise moment you could be shaping more of them. So you go on television and you make the case clearly and persuasively, and journalists who don't have access to your department's internal modeling have no reason to push back effectively, and the policy stands, and you are still in your position, and the £4 billion gap develops on the schedule the modeling predicted. You tell yourself this is how it works. You're right. It is exactly how it works. That's not actually the comfort it sounds like. The cabinet comes at 43. Home Secretary, one of the great offices of state, and one of the most politically dangerous, because the Home Office is where the gap between what the government promises on immigration and crime and national security and what it can actually deliver is most visibly permanent, and you are now the face of that gap. Your briefings on the first Monday tell you things you weren't told as a junior minister, not because they were secret exactly, because nobody tells you the full picture until you need the full picture, and needing the full picture means you're now accountable for it. The immigration backlog is 143,000 cases, not the official figure. The real figure, the one that includes the appeals and the judicial reviews and the cases that have been administratively pending for so long that the original applicants have had children who are now in British schools. The official figure is 98,000. You use the official figure in Parliament because the official figure is the defensible figure, and defensibility is what you need. And you tell yourself that the 143,000 includes categories that are technically not comparable, which is also true. And the gap between the technical truth and the functional reality is a gap you learn to live inside with a fluency that should concern you more than it does. There is a deportation case. A family of 4. Ghanaian. The father has been in the country for 11 years. 2 children born here. Mother working as a care worker during the pandemic. They have lost their appeal. The legal process has been exhausted. The removal is scheduled. A campaign by local MP and several newspapers creates pressure. Your office receives 12,000 emails in a week. Your special advisors tell you the politics cut both ways. Stopping the removal looks weak on the base. Proceeding with it becomes a human interest story that plays badly in the marginals. You make the decision that the legal process has to be respected, that you cannot selectively intervene based on media attention because that creates a perverse incentive that undermines the entire system. This is true. It is also convenient. The family is removed on a Tuesday morning at 5 a.m. You see it in the news that evening, and you feel something specific and unpleasant, and you note it, and you have a dinner to attend. The leadership contest happens because a prime minister lost a confidence vote after a scandal that you were adjacent to but not implicated in, which is its own lesson about how proximity to power works in both directions. You've been building toward this for 6 years. Not publicly. You don't announce ambitions prematurely in Westminster because announced ambition is something your colleagues will organize against. You've been having conversations, building the network of MPS who will back you, identifying what each of them needs that you can credibly promise, which is an exercise in resource allocation that would be recognized in any business school as a sophisticated negotiation, except the resources you're allocating are jobs in government and the promise of influence and the implicit understanding that loyalty now purchases access later. You win the first ballot with 87 votes. You win the runoff with 214. You go to the palace. The king asks you to form a government. You say you will. You drive to Downing Street in a car that doesn't stop for traffic lights, and you stand outside the black door and you speak to the cameras and you say the things that people say about service and responsibility in the country you love, and none of it is false. You mean it. You have always meant it. The meaning, it was never the complicated part. The complicated part is what happens at the first cabinet meeting when the chancellor puts the fiscal position in front of you, and the position is not what was publicly described during the campaign, because the publicly described position was developed before the current data was available, or so you're told. And what the data shows is that the spending commitments your party ran on will require either tax increases you explicitly ruled out, or service cuts you explicitly ruled out, or borrowing at a level the markets will punish. You have 6 weeks before the budget. You choose a combination of all three, and you develop the language to describe it as a responsible recalibration given changed circumstances, and your chancellor delivers it. And the opposition says you lied during the campaign, and you say the circumstances changed, and both of you are partly right, and the public mostly can't access enough information to adjudicate between the two positions, and the news cycle moves on. The job is not what you thought it would be. It is bigger in some ways and smaller in others. Bigger because the briefings are real, the decisions are real, the consequences fall on actual human beings, and you see the mechanism by which they do with a clarity you didn't have from any previous position. Smaller because the room to maneuver is less than the office suggests. You are constrained by your backbenchers, by your coalition partners if you have them, by the markets, by the Americans, by the European partners, by the opposition's ability to make any significant decision look like a scandal given enough effort. The freedom is real but narrow. You operate inside it with everything you have. There is a vote, you lose. There is a cabinet minister who leaks against you and whom you cannot fire because they represent a faction you cannot afford to alienate. There is a foreign policy decision you make that produces consequences that your intelligence services warned you were possible and that you hoped wouldn't materialize, and that materialize anyway. And you sit in a Cobra meeting at 2 in the morning looking at information that tells you that people are dead in circumstances that your decision contributed to. And you absorb this the way you've learned to absorb things, completely without showing it, and then setting it aside because there is another decision waiting. You win a second term with a reduced majority. You lose a third election and you leave Downing Street on a Thursday afternoon, and the car does stop for traffic lights now, and nobody is watching, and you sit in the back and the city passes the window and you think about the 11-year-old watching television, and what that child wanted, and what you got, and whether they're the same thing. You don't reach a conclusion. The question is too large and the evidence too ambiguous, and you've spent 30 years in an environment that rewards certainty, and you're not certain about this. The memoirs will be selective. The speaking fees will be substantial. The foundation will do real work in some areas. You'll be asked at a conference in 2031 whether you'd do it again, and you'll say yes without hesitation, and that will be true. And it will also not be the full answer, because the full answer is yes, and also I'm not entirely sure who I had to become to do it. And that is not the answer they're paying you to give. Somewhere tonight, a child is watching the news with a specific quality of attention. Parents noticing. Teachers slightly uncomfortable. Something in the child that already knows the shape of the room before they've ever been in it. They don't know yet what the room costs to enter, or what it costs to stay, or what you leave behind when you finally walk out of it and the car stops for lights again. That's how it works.